Picture this. Two of history's most profound thinkers, separated by nearly 2,000 years, sitting across from each other in a dimly lit corner booth of an old philosophy cafe. The air thick with the weight of centuries of human suffering and the eternal question that has haunted every civilization: what makes justice truly just? Tonight, we witness something extraordinary. Lucius Annaeus Seneca, the Roman Stoic philosopher, who advised emperors and wrote letters that still guide souls through darkness, faces off against Simone Weil, the brilliant French philosopher whose radical compassion led her to starve herself in solidarity with her war-torn countrymen. Between them lies the fundamental divide that has shaped every courtroom, every law, every moment, when humanity must decide between what the mind calculates and what the heart demands. The question burning in the space between them is not merely academic. It is the question that determines whether a starving mother who steals bread deserves punishment or understanding, whether a society should prioritize the cold efficiency of rules or the warm embrace of mercy. Should justice flow from the crystal-clear waters of reason, or should it spring from the deeper wells of human compassion? Seneca adjusts his simple tunic, his weathered hands folded calmly on the wooden table. At 70, he carries the weight of a man who has seen empire and exile, who has counseled the powerful and comforted the powerless. His eyes, sharp as ever, reflect the disciplined mind that found peace even in the face of Nero's madness. Across from him, Simone Weil leans forward slightly, her intense gaze burning with the passion of someone who has worked in factories alongside laborers, who has felt the ache of injustice in her very bones. At 34, she radiates the energy of someone who has lived more fully in her brief years than most do in a century. Her simple black dress speaks to her rejection of privilege, her commitment to standing with those society forgets. The cafe around them hums with quiet conversation, but their corner feels suspended in time. Steam rises from their untouched coffee cups, creating a thin veil between two worlds of thought. "You know," Seneca begins, his voice carrying the measured cadence of someone accustomed to choosing words carefully. "I have spent decades observing the machinery of justice, in the Roman courts, in the Senate, in the emperor's chambers, and what I have learned is that emotion, however noble, corrupts judgment like rust corrupts iron." Simone's eyes flash with immediate disagreement. "And I have spent my life among those crushed by that very machinery," she responds, her voice soft but intense. "Your pristine reason, Seneca, has a terrible blindness. It sees systems and principles, but cannot see the tears of a child whose father was condemned by perfectly logical laws." The old Stoic smiles, not condescendingly, but with the patience of someone who has weathered many storms of passion. "Ah, but that is precisely my point, my dear Simone. Those tears, real as they are, cannot guide us to justice. They guide us to favoritism, to the chaos of feeling over principle. When we let compassion rule, we create a justice that changes with the wind. And when we let reason rule," Simone counters, leaning forward, "we create a justice that has no soul. Tell me, when you advised Nero on matters of law and punishment, did your perfect reason account for the humanity of those who suffered under his edicts?" The question hangs in the air like smoke from a snuffed candle. Seneca's expression grows more serious, the weight of his complicated past settling on his shoulders. This is not merely an academic exercise for either of them. These are two souls who have grappled with the real consequences of philosophical choices. "I will not defend all of Nero's actions," Seneca says quietly, "but I will defend this. Without reason as our foundation, justice becomes whatever those in power feel it should be. At least reason offers consistency, predictability. It treats the powerful and powerless alike." "Does it?" Simone asks, her voice rising slightly. "Or does it simply dress up the preferences of those who design the system in the language of logic? Your Roman law, so reasonable, so systematic, did it not systematically exclude women, slaves, and foreigners from its very definition of personhood worthy of justice? The tension between them is palpable now, not hostile, but electric with the clash of two brilliant minds, engaging with ideas that have shaped the world. Around them, the cafe seems to fade into background, as if even the universe is holding its breath to witness this collision of philosophies. Seneca takes a slow sip of his coffee, using the moment to gather his thoughts. When he sets the cup down, his movements are deliberate, controlled, the physical manifestation of a mind trained in Stoic discipline. "You speak of exclusions in Roman law as if they invalidate reason itself," he says, his tone remaining calm despite the challenge. But consider this, Simone. Those exclusions were not failures of reason. They were failures to apply reason consistently. They were compromises with emotion, with tradition, with the very compassion you champion when it suited those in power. Simone shakes her head, her short hair catching the dim light of the cafe. No, Seneca. You are doing what philosophers have done for centuries, treating reason as if it exists in some pure realm, untouched by the biases and limitations of the humans who wield it. But reason is always someone's reason. And historically, that someone has been the powerful, the privileged, the ones who benefit from keeping others out. The observation strikes at something deeper than mere philosophical disagreement. Seneca's own life was built on the contradictions Simone describes. A philosopher of virtue who accumulated vast wealth while preaching simplicity, an advisor to power who wrote beautifully about justice while serving a tyrant. I understand why you say this, Seneca replies, his voice softer now. My own life bears the stains of those contradictions. But that is precisely why we need reason as our guide, not despite it. My failures came when I allowed other concerns, political necessity, personal safety, yes, even misguided compassion for Nero's position, to override what I knew to be right through rational analysis. But whose reason? Simone presses. The reason of a wealthy Roman advisor, or the reason of a Gallic slave? The reason of a man who never missed a meal, or the reason of a mother watching her children starve? You speak of reason as universal, but it is always embodied, always shaped by experience. The force of her argument settles between them like a challenge thrown down. Seneca recognizes the power of what she is saying, even as every fiber of his philosophical training rebels against it. If reason is merely the product of experience, he responds, then we have no justice at all, only competing perspectives. The slave owner has his reasons, the slave has hers, the Roman citizen has his logic, the barbarian has hers. Without some standard that transcends individual experience, we are left with nothing but the rule of the strongest. Exactly, Simone says, her eyes lighting up with the fierce joy of someone making a crucial point. You see the problem, but your solution, to create some allegedly pure reason divorced from experience, simply enshrines the perspective of whoever has the power to define what counts as rational. It does not transcend bias. It hides bias behind the mask of objectivity. Around them, the cafe continues its quiet rhythm, but their corner has become an arena where 2 millennia of human thought about justice clash and spark. Other patrons occasionally glance over, drawn by the intensity of their conversation, even if they cannot hear the words. Then what do you propose? Seneca asks, his philosopher's mind genuinely curious despite his disagreement. If not reason, then what guides justice? Pure emotion? The strongest sympathy? How do we choose between competing claims of suffering? Not pure emotion, Simone says, shaking her head. That would be as blind as your pure reason, but a justice that begins with attention, real attention to the particular suffering of particular people. A justice that starts by asking not, what does the law require, but what does this person need to flourish as a human being? And if what they need conflicts with what another person needs, Seneca challenges. If showing compassion to one means showing cruelty to another, this is why we need principles that stand above particular cases. Then we struggle with that tension, Simone replies without hesitation. We hold it in our hearts and minds and we make the best decision we can in that moment for those particular people in those particular circumstances. Yes, it is messier than your clean principles. Yes, it requires us to live with uncertainty and complexity, but it is honest about what justice really is. Not a machine that produces correct answers, but an ongoing human effort to reduce suffering and increase flourishing. The waiter approaches to refill their coffee cups, and both philosophers pause, allowing the interruption to create a natural break in their intense exchange. But even in the silence, the weight of their disagreement continues to pulse between them. As the waiter retreats, Seneca leans back in his chair, studying Simone, with the careful attention of someone who recognizes a worthy intellectual opponent. The lines around his eyes deepen as he considers her words, the weight of decades of experience visible in his weathered features. Let me pose a scenario to you, he says, his voice taking on the tone of a teacher presenting a particularly challenging problem. A plague strikes a city. Resources are limited. Medicine, food, shelter. The rational approach would be to distribute these resources based on clear principles, perhaps those most likely to survive, or those most essential to the community's functioning, or simply equal distribution among all. He pauses, allowing the scenario to settle in Simone's mind before continuing. But compassion looks at the individual faces. The elderly grandmother who raised orphans her entire life, but has little chance of survival. The corrupt official who hoards wealth but whose children are innocent. The pregnant mother whose unborn child represents the future. How does compassion choose between them? Simone does not answer immediately. She stares into her coffee cup as if the dark liquid might hold the solution to humanity's oldest dilemmas. When she looks up, her expression is somber but determined. "You are asking me to defend compassion by showing how it fails in impossible situations," she says. "But I could ask you the same about reason. What happens when your logical principles collide with each other? When saving the most lives conflicts with treating people equally? When efficiency demands sacrificing the vulnerable? At least reason provides a framework for making such decisions consistently," Seneca responds. "We can debate which principle should take priority, but once decided, we apply it universally. The judge does not need to agonize over every case, wondering whether his personal feelings are clouding his judgment. And that," Simone says, her voice rising with passion, "is exactly the problem. Justice becomes mechanical, divorced from the human reality it is supposed to serve. Your consistent judge may sleep well at night, but what about the people ground up by his consistent machine?" The intensity of her words draws a few glances from nearby tables, but neither philosopher seems to notice. They are fully absorbed in this battle of ideas that has shaped civilizations and destroyed them. "Consider your own life, Simone," Seneca says, his tone gentler now but no less pointed. "You starved yourself in solidarity with your fellow French citizens during the war, a beautiful gesture of compassion. But did it actually help anyone? Did your suffering reduce theirs by even one iota? Or did it simply satisfy your emotional need to share their pain while depriving the world of your brilliant mind?" The question hits its mark. Simone's face flushes, not with anger but with the recognition of truth partially told. It is a wound that has never fully healed, the question of whether her radical acts of solidarity were genuinely helpful or merely self-indulgent expressions of her own psychological needs. "At least my compassion was real," she says finally. "It may have been foolish, but it was honest. It acknowledged that my comfort was built on others' suffering. Your reason, on the other hand, allowed you to serve a monster while telling yourself you were being wise and moderate. The accusation hangs in the air between them like a blade. Both philosophers have touched the deepest wounds in each other's lives. Seneca's complicity with tyranny, Simone's potentially destructive radicalism. But rather than creating hostility, the exchange seems to deepen their respect for each other. "Perhaps," Seneca says slowly, "we are both right and both wrong. Perhaps justice requires neither pure reason nor pure compassion, but something more difficult, the wisdom to know when to apply which. Or perhaps," Simone counters, "the problem is thinking of them as separate at all. True compassion is not mere sentiment. It requires clear seeing, careful thinking, rigorous analysis of what actually helps people, and true reason is not mere calculation. It must be guided by love for human flourishing, or it becomes a tool of oppression." The suggestion creates a moment of unexpected convergence, a recognition that their debate may be revealing false choices rather than fundamental truths. But even as they glimpse this possibility, both feel the pull of their core convictions. The cafe around them has grown quieter as the evening deepens. Most of the other patrons have drifted away, leaving Seneca and Simone in a space that feels increasingly intimate, as if the very walls are leaning in to listen to their conversation. Simone traces the rim of her coffee cup with one finger, her expression thoughtful. "Tell me about the moment you knew," she says suddenly. "The moment you realized that all your careful reasoning, all your stoic principles had led you to serve evil." The question is direct, almost brutal in its simplicity. Seneca is quiet for a long moment, his hands still and folded on the table. When he speaks, his voice carries the weight of a confession that has taken decades to form. "It was not a single moment," he says finally. "It was 1,000 small compromises, each one reasonable in isolation. Nero was young, I told myself. He could be guided, educated, shaped into a better ruler. Each terrible decision, I convinced myself I was preventing something worse by remaining close to power rather than abandoning it to those with less wisdom." He pauses, looking not at Simone but at something far beyond the cafe walls. "The moment I truly knew was when he ordered his mother's death. I had run out of rational justifications, but by then I had been complicit in so much that my own survival depended on continued complicity. Reason had become the tool of my own moral cowardice. The admission settles between them with the weight of lived truth. Simone nods slowly, recognizing the honesty in his words. "And yet," she says softly, "you speak as if reason itself was the problem. But was it not the abandonment of reason, the substitution of rationalization for genuine rational analysis?" "Perhaps," Seneca acknowledges, "but that is precisely why I distrust compassion as a guide to justice. If I, trained in philosophy and supposedly committed to virtue, could deceive myself so thoroughly in the name of reason, how much easier is it to deceive ourselves in the name of love and sympathy?" Simone leans forward, her eyes intense. "Now let me tell you about my moment. I was working in a factory, trying to understand the reality of workers' lives. There was a woman there, older, her hands scarred from years on the machinery. She was fired for being too slow, for not meeting quotas that had been designed by men who had never touched the equipment she operated." Her voice grows stronger as she continues. "The factory owner, when I spoke to him, was entirely reasonable. He explained the economics, the competition, the necessity of efficiency. Every argument was logical, defensible, rational. And this woman, this human being with a name and a history, and people who depended on her, became simply an inefficient unit to be discarded." "But surely you see," Seneca interjects, "that the factory owner's reasoning was flawed, incomplete. A truly rational analysis would account for the full costs of such decisions, the social disruption, the human waste, the long-term consequences of treating people as mere tools." "Would it?" Simone challenges. "Or would it simply expand the calculation to include more variables while still treating human beings as variables in an equation? The fundamental problem remains. People become objects to be optimized rather than subjects with inherent dignity. The philosophical argument is becoming deeply personal now, each point scored not just in abstract reasoning, but in lived experience and moral passion. Yet without some systematic approach," Seneca presses, "how do we avoid the tyranny of arbitrary feeling? What prevents the judge from favoring those who remind him of his own children, or the ruler from showing mercy only to those who flatter her properly? The same thing that prevents the judge from disguising his prejudices as rational principles," Simone responds. "Honesty, self-examination, the willingness to be questioned and to question ourselves. The difference is that compassion admits its subjectivity, its limitations, its need for correction. Reason pretends to objectivity it does not possess." Their debate has reached a new level of intensity, each philosopher pressing the other to defend not just abstract principles, but the foundation of their entire approach to life and ethics. The cafe owner approaches their table, politely indicating that closing time is near. Both philosophers glance around, surprised to discover they are now the only customers remaining. The intensity of their debate has made them oblivious to the passage of time. "We can finish this conversation on the street," Seneca suggests, gathering his simple belongings. "Some arguments are too important to abandon for the sake of convenience." As they step outside into the cool night air, the change of setting seems to shift the energy of their discussion. Walking side by side down the empty street, their conversation takes on a different rhythm, more reflective, less combative. You know," Simone says, her breath visible in small clouds as she speaks, "I have been thinking about your plague scenario. You are right that compassion alone cannot solve impossible choices, but I wonder if you are asking the wrong question." Seneca slows his pace, intrigued. "How so?" "Instead of asking how to choose between victims, perhaps we should ask why such choices exist in the first place. Your rational distribution assumes scarcity as given, a law of nature to be managed efficiently. But what if that scarcity is itself a product of injustice? What if the real question is not how to divide insufficient resources fairly, but why resources are insufficient when abundance is possible?" They pause at a street corner, waiting for a late-night bus to pass. In the brief silence, Seneca considers her words with the careful attention they deserve. "That is a profound shift in perspective," he admits. "But even if you are correct about the sources of scarcity, we still must make decisions in the world as it exists, not as it should be. The plague victim needs medicine today, not after we have restructured society to prevent future plagues." "True," Simone agrees as they resume walking, "but the framework matters enormously. If we approach each crisis as an isolated problem to be solved through optimal distribution, we perpetually treat symptoms while ignoring causes. If we approach each crisis as a manifestation of deeper injustices, we might make different immediate choices while also working towards structural change. The streetlights cast long shadows as they walk, their figures moving in and out of pools of light, like ideas moving between clarity and obscurity. "I think," Seneca says slowly, "you are describing something more complex than pure compassion. You are describing a kind of reasoning that begins with care for persons, rather than abstract principles. That is not the rejection of reason I initially heard in your arguments. And I think," Simone responds, "you are describing something more grounded than pure reason. You are describing judgment that is informed by wisdom about human nature and social dynamics, not mere logical calculation. That is not the cold rationality I initially heard in yours." They have walked several blocks now, their conversation weaving through the empty streets like their ideas weave through the fundamental questions of human justice. Neither has abandoned their core convictions, but both have been changed by the encounter. Perhaps, Seneca muses, the opposition we began with is less absolute than it appeared. Perhaps the question is not whether justice should be based on reason or compassion, but how to integrate them properly. Or perhaps, Simone adds, the question is how to understand both reason and compassion more deeply, so that we see their necessary connection rather than their apparent conflict. The possibility hangs between them like a bridge, neither is quite ready to cross, but both can see clearly now. As they turn down another quiet street, Seneca breaks the contemplative silence with a question that cuts to the heart of their entire discussion. "Simone, let me ask you something that troubles me deeply about your approach. If justice is to be guided primarily by compassion, by attention to particular suffering, how do we maintain any coherent legal system? How do we have laws at all, rather than simply case-by-case judgments based on whoever evokes the most sympathy?" Simone stops walking and turns to face him directly, her expression serious in the glow of a nearby streetlight. "You assume that law and justice are the same thing," she says, "but what if they are not? What if law is simply one tool, an imperfect, often unjust tool that societies use to approximate justice? What if our mistake is thinking that following laws automatically produces just outcomes? But without law," Seneca insists, "we have chaos. We have the rule of whim, of personal preference, of whoever can make the most compelling emotional appeal. Surely you see the dangers in that." "I see different dangers," Simone replies, as they resume walking. "I see the danger of mistaking order for justice, of confusing consistency with fairness. Your Roman law was very orderly, very consistent. It consistently oppressed the same people in the same ways for centuries. Is that preferable to the chaos of actually considering each person's humanity?" The question challenges one of Seneca's deepest convictions, that social order, however imperfect, is preferable to social chaos. His Stoic training has taught him to value stability, predictability, the careful management of social forces. Consider the alternative, he argues. If every judge makes decisions based on personal compassion, if every magistrate follows individual sympathy rather than established principle, then citizens have no way to predict how they will be treated. The law becomes arbitrary, capricious. That may help some individuals, but it destroys the foundation of civilized society. Does it? Simone challenges. Or does it threaten only a particular kind of society, one built on the systematic exclusion and exploitation of many for the benefit of few? Perhaps what you call civilization is precisely what needs to be destroyed. The radical nature of her suggestion stops Seneca in his tracks. They have reached a small park, and he sinks onto a bench, suddenly looking every one of his 70 years. "You would tear down everything," he says quietly. "Centuries of accumulated wisdom, legal precedent, social structures that have brought stability to millions of lives. You would cast all of that aside in pursuit of what? Perfect justice? An impossible dream that will never be achieved." Simone sits beside him on the bench, her voice gentler now but no less passionate. "I would tear down everything that builds human happiness on human misery," she says. "Everything that treats some people as more deserving of dignity than others. Everything that prioritizes order over flourishing, efficiency over humanity. Yes, it is radical. Yes, it is dangerous. But what is the alternative? To preserve systems that we know cause suffering because we are afraid of the uncertainty of change." They sit in silence for several minutes, each absorbed in their own thoughts. Around them, the city sleeps, unaware that two brilliant minds are wrestling with questions that could reshape human civilization. "You know what frightens me most about your approach?" Seneca finally says. "It places an enormous burden on every individual decision-maker. Every judge, every administrator, every person in authority must be wise enough, compassionate enough, and strong enough to resist corruption and self-deception. It assumes a level of virtue in ordinary human beings that I have rarely observed. And you know what frightens me most about yours? Simone responds. It removes the burden of moral decision-making from individuals and places it on systems that are inherently conservative, inherently biased toward existing power structures. It allows people to commit terrible acts while claiming they are simply following orders, following laws, following rational procedures. The fear in both their voices is palpable, born not from abstract theorizing, but from lived experience of how philosophical choices translate into human suffering. The eastern sky is beginning to show the first pale hints of dawn as Seneca and Simone continue their conversation in the quiet park. Neither has slept, but neither seems tired. The energy of their intellectual struggle has sustained them through the night. I have been thinking, Seneca says, his voice carrying a note of something approaching wonder, about something you said earlier, about true compassion, requiring rigorous thinking, and true reason requiring love for human flourishing. What if the opposition we have been debating is not the real opposition at all? Simone nods slowly, her own thoughts moving in a similar direction. You mean, what if the real opposition is between authentic justice, whether we call it reasoned or compassionate, and the various counterfeits that parade under those names? Exactly, Seneca says, leaning forward with renewed energy. What if the choice is not between reason and compassion, but between genuine concern for justice and the use of either rational or emotional language to disguise self-interest, cowardice, or simple laziness? The insight feels like a key turning in a lock, opening possibilities that neither had fully seen before. Think about my time with Nero, Seneca continues. I told myself I was being reasonable, moderate, strategic, but was I actually reasoning about justice, or was I using the language of reason to avoid the difficult and dangerous act of confronting evil directly? And think about the factory owner I mentioned, Simone adds. He spoke constantly of human compassion, of how much he cared for his workers, of how painful it was to make difficult decisions. But was he actually being compassionate, or was he using the language of sympathy to disguise his unwillingness to sacrifice profit for human welfare? They are building something together now, a new understanding that transcends their initial opposition without abandoning the insights that brought them to this point. Perhaps, Seneca suggests, what we really need is not to choose between reason and compassion, but to learn to distinguish authentic instances of each from their imitations. And perhaps, Simone adds, we need to understand that authentic reason and authentic compassion actually require each other. Real thinking about justice must be motivated by genuine care for human beings. Real care for human beings must be guided by honest analysis of what actually helps them. The possibility sits between them like a new dawn, illuminating landscape they had not seen clearly before. But even as they glimpse this synthesis, both feel the pull of their fundamental commitments. I still believe, Seneca says carefully, that without systematic principles, without consistent application of rational standards, justice degenerates into favoritism and caprice. Individual compassion, however sincere, cannot be the foundation for social order. And I still believe, Simone responds with equal care, that without genuine attention to particular persons and their actual suffering, justice becomes mechanical and heartless. Systematic principles, however logical, cannot capture the full reality of human need. They have not resolved their disagreement, but they have transformed it. What began as a battle between opposing worldviews has become a collaborative exploration of how two necessary aspects of justice might complement rather than contradict each other. Perhaps, Seneca says as the first rays of sunlight begin to filter through the trees above them, the question is not which approach is correct, but how to embody both wisdom and care, both clear thinking and genuine concern. Perhaps, Simone agrees, the question is how to become the kind of people who can hold both reason and compassion without sacrificing either to the other. As they rise from the bench and prepare to part ways, both philosophers carry with them not certainty, but something more valuable, a deeper understanding of the complexity of justice and the humility to continue questioning their own assumptions. The debate between reason and compassion in justice will continue long after this night, in courtrooms and legislatures, in the hearts and minds of everyone who must choose between competing claims of right and wrong. But perhaps this conversation has shown that the choice itself may be less important than the wisdom, integrity, and genuine care for human flourishing that we bring to whatever approach we choose. In the growing light of dawn, Seneca and Simone walk in opposite directions, their philosophical differences intact, but their respect for each other deepened. The question that brought them together remains unanswered, but their engagement with it has revealed new dimensions of an ancient human struggle, the never-ending effort to create justice in a world where perfect solutions do not exist, but where the attempt to find them remains our highest calling. The street is quiet again, but the echoes of their conversation linger in the morning air, a reminder that some questions are too important to resolve and too urgent to abandon.